This is Darren with Reboot Congress, and I'm here today with Ed Martin. I was going to ask him a few questions. He has recently announced that he's exploring the possibility of running for Congress, specifically in Missouri's 3rd District. Currently, Russ Carnahan, a Democrat, is in that seat, and Ed is planning on running on the Republican side. You talked about both transparency and earmarks, and one of the arguments which I've heard put forth to defend earmarks is that it allows people in Congress to have some direction over the funds, and if that direction wasn't there, then bureaucrats would be directing the allocation of those funds. How do you propose to address that? How do you propose to get congressional accountability for those dollars as opposed to just delegating it off to a bureaucrat?
Let me answer it two ways. You are correct in asking a question about bureaucrats. The problem in America and with American government and the growth in American government and state government is not the lobbyists. It's not necessarily the lobbyists or necessarily the elected officials alone. What's occurred is that Leviathan, that is state and federal governments, are so peopled with workers and bureaucrats that it's hard to keep track. It's hard to know who's doing what. So the first thing we have to do, again, is transparency throughout government. The more people watching what people are doing, the better. Second thing is, I think over time we need to be willing to think about how to reduce the size of government. Some programs need to say, okay, effective for a while, but let's move on. There are a myriad of programs in the Commerce Department and other places that could use a look at, and maybe we stop doing them. And the same thing is true at the state level. But back to your question. The problem with earmarks, again, are transparency and, as you say, trying to get control of the appropriation process. I think the best thing is, again, to be upfront with the principles, and if you take transparency and a clear discussion of what your principles are, you can make clear what's going on. I'll give you an example. For me, there are times where the federal government needs to undertake significant infrastructure projects. One of them, to me, would relate to the Mississippi River. Whether it's the flooding or the lock and dam system, significant dollars need to be put to that, and it's for the benefit of a large portion of the country. That kind of project and the money that goes along with that may look like an earmark, but they would have to fit certain criteria. Is it something that's so big in scope that only the federal government could do it? Is it something that the local government couldn't do better? And is it something that we can manage well and transparently? And I think then you can say, okay, this is a good way to do it. But I'd say my final point is, most of the problem that you see with Congressman Carnahan and why people are frustrated is because he is not standing up and being the representative for the district. He's being part of an effort by Nancy Pelosi and others to change the way we live. My goal would be to stand up and articulate publicly and very proudly what we think the people here need and what they should get and what should go on. And I think that's part of it, is being more accessible, being more out there as a representative, as opposed to sort of, staying behind your desk and not doing much else.
You talked about identifying programs that could be cut and cutting them.
Mm-hmm.
One thing which I've thought about, I don't know that I've necessarily blogged on it, but would it be possible to change the way we do business in Congress such that we identify the measures of effectiveness prior to passing legislation and set goals for those measures such that the law will sunset or be revised or force a revision if those measures of effectiveness aren't met? Let me just give you an example of that. The spending bill that was passed earlier this year, we were told that we needed to pass that spending bill because it would ensure that unemployment would not go up, that we would have unemployment of maybe 8.5%, and if we didn't pass it, we would have 9% unemployment. And now unemployment is way up over 9%. It's 9.5, 9.6. It seems like that wasn't money well spent. How do we pull that back?
I certainly think sunsets are good on especially on the creation of new spending programs and sort of checks that stop the flow of money. I think that's a good example. I mean, on the stimulus bill, I think at this point, we're not seeing much progress. What we've discovered, because the bill passed so quickly without enough scrutiny, what we've discovered is most of the so-called stimulus bill is really the creation of liberal, far left spending programs and the expansion of the welfare state. I think we should stop that. Ultimately, however, there are two things I would say again that it comes down to. First, leadership by the executive is key to sort of taking on the bureaucracies and seeing what's working and what's not. We can say that Congress is going to try to defund or choose programs, and they should to some extent. But ultimately, the executive branch is the executive branch, and one of the things that we have been lacking is an executive that would take a hard look and find programs that aren't working, point them out, and move on. And it's the same reason we just talked about. There's lots of bureaucrats and lots of people working there, and it's hard to eliminate jobs. But I think that we need a stronger executive to take on those things, and one that's willing to do that. But here's the problem. Again, when we're in our rush to do things, as we are now, we have to rush to do health care reform. What we have in the House, for example, is a bill that is transforming the way we get health care, and we don't even know it yet. For example, Medicare would be gutted under the current system. It would be folded into the bill that the House, that Congressman Carnahan is defending so vociferously. Medicare would be folded in with others, and we'd be changed drastically. Now, I think if you want to have a debate about Medicare, have a debate about Medicare. There's plenty of fraud there. There's plenty of mistreatment of people, whatever. But right now, what we're doing is saying we must do one thing, fix health care, and in fixing it, we're drastically changing a health care program that is serving a whole bunch of people, more or less well. I mean, there's problems with it. So my concern is not what we're cutting or what we're not funding, but that we're not having a serious debate about what we're doing. We're doing right now, Congressman Carnahan and Speaker Pelosi and the White House are telling us we must do something. And they're not telling us what that something is going to do. They're trying to say it's going to make things cheaper or make things work better. And that's a bigger problem to me. But again, what we do not have, and what I think the Tea Party showed, is a willingness by people to stand up and say what they really stand for, who they are, and what they believe, almost without fear, whether you win or lose, whether you serve multiple terms or not. Because what we have now, for example, is Congressman Carnahan, all he wants to do is continue to be a Washington, D.C. guy and part of that Democrat team, and instead of standing up for his district.